She had never seen a human before. Only the smoldering ruins they left behind on other moons' tailies whispered through frostbitten wind, eyes filled with fear and wonder. On Carith 9, where the clouds moved like bruised skin and the ground never thawed, she lived in quiet caution with her child, hiding deep inside crystal caverns from storms that screamed louder than machines. Her kind, the Varellan, had once believed themselves the apex of survival. Their cold-blooded bodies adapted to the razor winters of this dying rock, their minds tuned to vibrations no human ear could hear. But time wore them thin. The storms were growing crueler, longer, and even their instincts couldn't keep pace. It came one night, a shriek like a dying star, a burst of furious light that shattered the silence. Her child, barely past hatching age, had wandered out before the barrier seals could lock. She screamed its name, but her voice was lost in the storm's teeth. The wind clawed at her eyes as she crawled into the white void, heart shattering with every step. She didn't even see the figure at first. Just the crunch of heavy boots in the snow, the flicker of metal beneath pale blue light. He stood like a broken statue, one arm shielding her child in a thick parka, the other gripping a flare that bled orange against the ice. He didn't look like the monster she had imagined, didn't speak in fire or rage. His breathing was ragged, skin frostbitten in patches, but his eyes burned with something she didn't have a name for. He looked down at her child, then at her, and without a word, stepped forward, placing the little one gently in her arms as if he understood everything without needing to ask. She could feel the warmth still clinging to the child's limbs, the way it shivered not from cold but from terror, and she looked up into this human's face, not knowing what to say, not even knowing if he could hear her thoughts as her kind often could. And then the storm rose again, more furious than before, forcing them to take shelter together in the hollowed bones of a dead glacier. She should have been afraid. She should have fled or fought, but something inside her trembled, not from fear, but from the unknown flicker of hope that perhaps not all monsters came with hunger in their hearts. She watched him from across the cavern, the flare dimming now, his breath shallow. He hadn't spoken once. His hand trembled, reaching toward some small device on his belt before falling limp again. Blood red and shocking had begun to bloom beneath his coat, staining the white with the color of sacrifice. She had never seen red before. Not in that way. It glowed like fire in the dark, and she realized the storm had not wounded him. He had walked into it, knowing the risk, for a child that wasn't even his, for a species that didn't even have a name for mercy. Outside, the storm screamed like a dying god, and inside, silence pressed close, thick and trembling. She reached across the space between them, hand hesitant, uncertain if touching him would harm him more. But he looked up at her then, eyes soft and full of something fragile, and he whispered a single word in his broken tongue, safe. She didn't understand the language, but the meaning echoed inside her deeper than thought. The storm raged for hours. In that time, she tended to his wounds with ice moss and thermal glands, guided by old instinct and new desperation. Her child slept between them, small and alive. The human did not ask for thanks. He didn't ask for anything. He simply endured, watching the ceiling of the cave like he was somewhere far away. And she wondered, what kind of being walks into certain death, not for glory or conquest, but because a stranger cried out for help? There were stories, long ago, of creatures who burned bright and fast, who carried hearts too large for their own survival. Perhaps humans were not destroyers after all. Perhaps they were stars falling in silence, lighting the dark places no one else dared go. Asterisk, asterisk, he awoke slowly, not with a jolt or panic, but with the ache of a body used up and still too stubborn to surrender. The air was bitter and damp, curling against his skin like icy breath, but there was warmth beside him, a small shape tucked beneath the folds of his jacket. The alien child, still alive, still breathing. For a long time, he simply stared at it, marveling at the way its thin, glimmering scales pulsed with faint bioluminescence, like a heartbeat turned into light. It didn't look like anything from Earth, but something about the way it curled closer to him reminded him of his niece back home, the way she used to fall asleep in his arms after bad dreams. It pulled at something deep in him, something older than war and older than space something. Simply human. He shifted and winced, pain flaring sharp and mean along his side. The wound had crusted over with some alien resin, greenish and soft. His head turned, and there she was, the mother, still watching him, still silent. Her eyes were like twin moons, black and endless, but they shimmered now, not with fear, but with confusion. He had expected her to run, to attack, to see him as the enemy. That's what they were trained for. Every first contact manual drummed it in. Assume hostility until proven otherwise. But nothing in his training had prepared him for the sound of a mother's scream, nor the desperate way her hands had shaken when he gave her back her child. He sat up slowly, each breath burning, but he forced himself upright. She flinched at first, a reflex, then paused. He raised both hands, palms open. Universal sign of peace, though out here on Kareth 9, nothing was truly universal. Still, she didn't retreat. In fact, she tilted her head ever so slightly, as if listening to something he couldn't hear. Maybe she was. He remembered the science briefings. The Varellan could sense electromagnetic changes, emotional frequencies, even. Maybe she was reading the pain in him. Maybe that's why she didn't run. He reached for his field pack, grimacing as every muscle protested. The rations were sealed, and dull gray protein bricks no one back home would ever willingly eat. He broke one in half, offering it to her. It was a stupid gesture. She wouldn't want it. But she looked at it curiously, not recoiling, and took it with slender fingers, clawed but gentle. Her hand brushed his just briefly, and he felt a cold shiver down his spine that wasn't from the temperature. She turned the ration over, sniffed it, then offered it to the child first. The little one took a nibble, then more. Only then did she take a piece for herself. He chuckled softly. Not so different, huh? He murmured, voice hoarse. She blinked at the sound. He wasn't sure if it was the words or the tone, but something passed between them. Not understanding, not yet, but a ripple in the silence, a crack in the ice. Time passed in awkward stillness. He checked his comstead. The storm's interference was stronger than expected, and the nearest outpost was days away on foot. Assuming he could even walk that far, he was stranded, bleeding, and stuck in a cave with an alien species no human had ever peacefully contacted. He should have been panicking. He should have been calculating odds, rehearsing escape routes. But instead, he found himself watching them, mother and child curled together, whispering in some soft frequency his ears couldn't pick up, their bodies moving like light and water. And when the child turned to look at him, wide-eyed and curious, not afraid, he felt something shift inside him again. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a small, battered holopod. With a few taps, a projection flickered to life grainy, but clear enough. A photo of Earth, mountains, forests, a lake so blue it looked like glass. And two figures standing by the shore, waving, his sister, his niece. A frozen moment from a world so far away it felt like a dream now. He didn't know why he showed it. Maybe to explain himself. Maybe to prove he was more than the armor and the blood. The Varellan mother leaned in, gaze fixed. The child chirped softly, as if mimicking the waves in the image. He pointed at the figures. Family, he said gently, then touched his chest. Mine. She didn't speak, not with words, but something in her body moved in a way that made the meaning clear. She nodded, slow and solemn, then touched her own child, then herself. Family. She echoed in a voice like wind across snow. He exhaled, the word echoing in his ears. They weren't friends yet, not allies. But the bridge had begun stone by stone, built from a single shared truth. They both knew what it meant to risk everything for someone small and helpless. They both knew what it meant to be the last shield in a storm. Outside, the winds howled. Inside, they waited not as strangers anymore, but something softer, something new. The storm did not stop that day, nor the next. It pressed against the cavern like a living thing, howling and slamming against the ice with the fury of a beast denied its prey. But inside, beneath the luminous stalactites that dripped slowly, from the cavern ceiling, warmth flickered into being, not from fire, but from shared breath, from glances no longer edged with fear, from a silence that softened rather than stretched. The human, whose name was Alec, though she did not know it yet, grew weaker with each hour. He hid it well, but she could feel the shudder in his muscles, the slight delay in his reflexes. His wound was healing, but slowly, and the cold never truly relented. She watched him closely now, not with suspicion, but with an intensity born of questions she did not have the words to ask. What drove a creature to walk into death for another's child? What kind of being let itself bleed for someone it had never met? Among her kind, survival was sacred, even selfishness forgivable. Empathy was a rare, almost alien instinct. It had been necessary. They had lived on a dying world for too long. But this human, he had altered something fundamental with that single, selfless act. Her child was changing too. The little one, who had once been timid and cold, now clung to the human side with innocent ease. It mimicked his gestures, played with his gear, chirped curiously at his strange sounds. Alec responded gently, with a tired patience that never snapped or scolded. He let the child nestle beneath his arm when sleep took them, as though they had always belonged there. She should have objected. It was too fast, too foreign. But watching them curled together like that soft breath, fogging into the cold, it stirred something she had buried long ago, longing. As the winds wailed beyond the ice wall, and the cold seeped deeper than bone, she approached. He was awake, of course. The pain never let him rest long. His eyes were open, reflecting the faint bioluminescence of the cave. She sat beside him, unsure how to begin. Then, slowly, she reached out and traced her fingers in the frost-covered floor, forming shapes in their ancient script. He watched, puzzled but attentive. She paused, then pointed at herself and drew a single mark, her name. Not a word he could say, not easily, but it held meaning. Then she pointed to him, tilting her head. He blinked, then smiled faintly. Alec, he said, placing a hand on his chest. She tried to repeat it, her voice faltering, clumsy. Alec. He laughed softly, not mocking, but surprised. It was the first time she had heard that sound from him. It echoed strangely in the cavern, warm and alive. Encouraged, she tried again. Alec? He nodded. Better than my commanding officer ever said it. Then he lifted his hand, his fingers, moving slowly in mimicry of her script, drawing something beside her name. It wasn't precise, but it was close. She stared at it, stunned. He was trying to learn her language, not just her sounds, but her meaning. No one had ever tried before. Their lessons continued. Quiet, halting. A word here, a gesture there. She taught him the symbols for cold, for shelter, for charm, for child. He showed her his data pad, letting her trace the images and sounds of earth, birds, trees, water that flowed instead of froze. She had never seen green before, never known that wind could carry scent instead of frost. When he showed her a recording of music and old earth lullabies, she felt her throat tighten, though she could not explain why. One night, she dared to ask not with words, but with touch and tone. Why? Why did he come for them? Why risk so much? He understood. Somehow he always did. He pointed to the child, then to her, then to himself, because it matters. He searched for more words, grimacing with the effort. No species survives if we only save our own. She looked at him then, truly looked. The way his hands trembled from cold and pain. The way his eyes still burned with fire even as his body failed. She leaned closer, pressed her hand to his chest, not threatening, but tender. He flinched at first, then stilled. She could feel his heart, too fast, too fragile, and beneath it, something deeper, the echo of grief. It rippled through her senses like a wave, sharp and ancient. He had lost someone, she didn't ask who. She didn't need to. It was in the way he stared. Too long at the photo of his family. In the way he touched the child like a memory come alive. Her people had no gods anymore, no rituals of mourning. But they had empathy, buried deep beneath their frostbitten culture. And tonight, for the first time in many cycles, she let herself feel. She sang, softly, a sound only her kind would recognize, a mourning song, made of subharmonic tones and pulse echoes. A lullaby for the lost. Alec didn't understand the words, but his eyes grew wet, and he bowed his head as if in prayer. The storm howled outside. But within the cave, two broken souls found a strange kind of peace, not through language, not through logic, but through pain, and the fierce, defiant hope that even in the coldest places, something warm could still survive. Asterisk, asterisk. The third night began like the others' whispers of ice scraping the walls, the dim glow of the cave's natural. Crystals casting slow-moving shadows across the alien stone. Alec had barely slept, his body running on instinct and whatever rations he could coax into his stubborn stomach. The child was resting, curled beneath a thermal blanket he had shared, and the Varellan mother sat beside him, quiet but alert. The peace they'd managed to build in that short span felt sacred, too fragile to last. He sensed it even before the tremors began, that uneasy stillness that comes before a storm inside the ground. Not above it dot at first, it was subtle dust, falling like snowflakes from the ceiling, the echo of pressure building far below. Then came the pulse. It hit them both at once. She rose immediately, eyes wide, mandibles twitching in alarm. Alec didn't need words. He felt the shift in her posture, the panic that shimmered just beneath her stillness. She turned to him and drew a symbol in the frost, a spiral with jagged lines through it. He'd seen it before on old mission maps, a quick marker. But it wasn't just natural. There was something else behind her urgency, something she hadn't told him. Before he could ask, the cave groaned, deep and low like a dying creature. Walls pulsed. Cracks split across the far end. He grabbed the child, pressed it to his chest, and the mother led them deeper, into narrow tunnels only the Varellan could have mapped in their minds. The light faded. The pressure increased. And then, finally, they reached a chamber unlike any he'd seen, an ancient structure. Artificial and humming with forgotten energy. At the center stood a pillar of black metal, etched with glyphs that glowed faintly in Alec's presence. The human part of him wanted to marvel, to document, to understand. But something about the pillar made his skin crawl. The mother stepped close to it, placing her hand on its surface. It lit brighter at her touch, and a hologram rose blurry, fragmented, and filled with screaming. Not sound, not exactly, but bursts of violet static and emotion, pain encoded into light. And then he saw them. Humans. Not like him, armored, armed, laughing as they tore into Varellan hives of flamethrowers, dragging corpses through snow, tagging alien carcasses for research and extraction. His stomach turned. This wasn't fiction. This was footage. Real. Raw and filtered. A massacre. He staggered back, bile rising in his throat. She turned to him, her eyes unreadable now. No anger, no accusations. Just sorrow. She spoke slowly in their new shared words. Your kind came before, not like you. They killed, burned us. Alec dropped to his knees. He couldn't speak. The shame hit him like a blow. He had read mission reports, yes, but they were always sanitized. Hostile encounter. Self-defense action. Nothing like this. This was genocide, pure and efficient. And they had buried it beneath layers of protocol and translation errors. She knelt beside him and, after a long pause, touched his shoulder. You saved mine, she said. You are not them. He wanted to believe it. But what if he was? What if the suit and badge and mission patch on his shoulder marked him as one of those same invaders, whether he chose it or not? The hologram shifted. Another memory. This one. Different. A Varellan, bleeding and weak, handing over a data crystal to a human scientist, one who didn't kill. Who protected them? Who broadcast their plight across the sector? The signal had been lost, intercepted. The scientist Dr. Ray Monroe was declared missing in action, but she had tried. She had believed in coexistence. The mother gestured toward. That moment in the hologram, her voice lower now. Some humans tried to help, like you. They died for us. Alex stared at the fading image. He remembered the name. Monroe had been a ghost story among the explorers. A peacemaker who went too far, who trusted the enemy. But now, it seemed she hadn't failed. She'd planted a seed. And maybe he, Alec Walker, soldier turned reluctant ambassador, was standing in the shadow of that seed beginning to bloom. His chest ached not from the wound, but from something deeper. This mission had never been about peace. His orders were vague: observe, assess, survive. He'd seen the redacted lines. If he'd found a threat, command wouldn't have sent aid. They'd have sent bombs. And that realization shattered something inside him. He looked up at the mother, then down at the child still nestled close. Everything in him screamed to protect them. Not just from the storm, but from his own kind. He pulled out his remaining flare sticks, his emergency beacon. And the single-coded transmitter only meant for life or death contact. It would give away their position. It would call his ship. But it would also call the others, the ones who might follow in the old footsteps. He stared at it, the light blinking, waiting dot, and in the flickering shadows of ancient violence and new trust. Alec made a choice. Asterisk, asterisk, the beacon pulsed in Alec's palm like a tiny heartbeat, red and steady, and with every blink, he felt the weight of his decision tightening around his chest. One press would light up their location to the entire quadrant his ship. Yes, but also any patrols in orbit, any lurking drones pinging for human movement. It would bring help. It would bring destruction. He could almost hear his commanding officer's voice now. Asset secured. Threat neutralized. Not a name, not a life threat. That's all they were to those orbiting eyes. The Varellan mother watched him silently, sensing the battle waging behind his expression. Her kind didn't need language to see emotion. They tasted it, felt it as pressure shifts in the air, and what she felt from him now must have been unbearable. But she did not stop him. She didn't flinch. She simply moved closer to her child and wrapped her body around it, not in fear, but in readiness. A mother's final stand. She was preparing to die with grace, and that nearly broke him. Alex stood, the beacon still in his grasp, and walked to the edge of the cavern where the wind song turned into a scream. Beyond that ice wall was the storm still raging across. The ridges of Karth 9, fierce enough to blind heat sensors and scramble atmospheric drones. They had a few hours before it cleared. After that, satellites would align. A response ship would arrive. No matter what he chose now, the clock had started. He could call for a pickup, extract himself, maybe even take them with him, but they'd be locked, prodded, dissected. He had seen what containment meant in field reports. He could smash the beacon, leave no signal, and stay here to die in the ice like Monroe, preserving their secret a little longer, but the storm would still end. They'd still come looking. No. The only real choice, the only one with a chance, was to send a signal that told the truth. He flipped open the casing on the beacon and accessed its old code functions, digging into the archaic firmware with fingers that trembled not from cold, but urgency. He needed to override the military ping and embed a message one not encrypted by standard protocols. He needed a story, short and undeniable. Visuals, audio, emotion, a message from a human. Not a soldier. He connected the beacon to his datapad and uploaded the footage. Not the battle-scarred mission logs, not the sanitized scans. He uploaded the cavern, the child playing with his discarded glove, the mother singing soft tones to calm the tremors, the moment she saved his life by stopping the ice from collapsing. And then slowly he recorded his voice. It cracked as he spoke, but he didn't edit. My name is Alec Walker. I was sent here to observe. I found survivors, not hostile, not monsters. Just people. A mother and her child. I walked into a storm to save a life, and they saved mine in return. If you're receiving this, do not treat this signal as a threat. Do not respond with force. These are sentient beings with intelligence, compassion, and memory. We were the monsters here years ago, but that ends now. It ends with me. He paused, his throat closing tight, then added, and if this message never makes it past orbit, then let someone, anyone, find what's left of me and remember that once a human chose mercy. He transmitted it, not through military channels, but through the Emergency Alliance frequency civilian level. It would be slow, weak, but it had heart. Maybe heart was enough. As the beacon lit up with a final green pulse and the signal vanished into the storm, Alec turned back toward them. The mother stood still, her head tilted. He could feel her question before she asked it. He pointed to the beacon, then to the cave ceiling. I told them the truth. Her eyes shimmered, but there was no time for relief. The ground trembled again, stronger now. Not quake, not tectonic. Engines. Alec ran to the mouth of the cave and squinted through the blizzard. Through the snow, the silhouette of a drop pod burned downward, cutting through the storm with practiced violence. It wasn't a rescue ship. It was small, fast, tactical. They had heard him, and they had not believed. His stomach twisted. He grabbed the child, pressed it to the mother, and spoke quickly. You have to go, now, through the tunnels. There's a way out, right? Another path? She nodded slowly, sensing the urgency. But her eyes stayed locked to his. He placed a cold hand on her shoulder. They won't listen to me if they see you. But if I stay, if they see me alone, they might delay just long enough. You have to trust me. The child clung to him. Its small claws dug into his coat. It chirped once like a cry. He swallowed hard and pried it loose, pushing it into her arms. The mother hesitated. Her whole body shook, not with cold, but with fear. Not for herself. For him. And then she did something he never expected. She leaned forward and pressed her forehead to his. One long, silent moment where no words were needed. A gesture of sorrow, of respect, of farewell. Then she turned and ran into the tunnels, vanishing like a memory into the dark. Alec turned back toward the mouth of the cave. The ship was closer now. He could see the insignia, military, weapons primed. He exhaled and waited. Alone. Asterisk. The drop pod hit the snow like a meteor. Steam and fire ripping through the storm as its impact shattered the ice shelf just beyond the cave's lip. Alec shielded his eyes from the glare, the wind flattening his breath as the pod hissed open, metal petals unfolding to reveal a figure clad in the dull black armor of the Terran Frontier Corps. The soldier stepped out slowly, rifle held low but ready, visor reflecting the cave's flickering light. Behind him, more followed. 3, 4 boots pounding snow, formation tight, movements practiced. These weren't scouts. These were enforcers. Alec stepped forward, blood from his reopened wounds seeping through his thermal layers. He didn't flinch, didn't back down. He raised his hands in plain sight. The cold bit into his bones, but his voice rose strong above the wind. Stand down. I'm alive. I'm unarmed. There are no hostiles here. The lead soldier paused. Visor tilted. Recognition flickered. The helmet split open with a hiss, and beneath it, a woman's face emerged. Captain Zora Leon, stoic and sharp-eyed. The kind of commander who wore regulation-like armor and trusted only what she could see with her own eyes. Lieutenant Walker, she said. Her voice cut through the cold like a blade. You went dark. Transmitted on civilian channels, breached protocol. And now we find you at the coordinates of a known Varellan site alone. Explain. They're not a threat, Alex said immediately. They're not what we were told. This isn't a hostile species. There's a mother and a child, that's all. They saved my life. Captain Leon's face did not change. And the rest of your squad? Dead, he said, truth crackling like static in his throat. The storm took them? And if the Varellan wanted me dead, I wouldn't be standing here. A second soldier stepped forward, lifting a scanner. There's biological residue, too. Distinct Varellan signatures. Fresh. They were here. They were leaving, Alex snapped, stepping in front of the scanner. They're not enemies. They're survivors. Just like us. There was a long pause. Wind howled across the ridge. One of the soldiers glanced at the captain. She didn't blink. We have standing orders, she said coldly. No contact, no containment. Varellan are considered volatile. We secure the site and eliminate unauthorized variables. His heart dropped. You're talking about killing a child. You know that, right? They're not children, Lieutenant. They're Varellan. Their young have been known to project neural shockwaves when threatened. Our scientists back home still have injuries from last cycle's containment breach. They were being dissected alive in that breach, Alec growled. Wouldn't you scream too? For the first time, emotion cracked through Leon's shell. A flicker uncertainty, maybe. Disgust, but not at him. You've been compromised, she said, quieter now. Stockholm phenomena is real, especially in prolonged isolation. I'm not brainwashed, he said. I'm awake for the first time in my life. She lifted her rifle. It wasn't pointed at him yet, but the intent shimmered in the air. If they're still nearby, you need to step aside. You're not giving the orders here, Alec. He stared at her, and something inside him hardened, not from rage, but from clarity. He stepped forward, closing the space between them until her rifle pressed lightly against his chest. Her finger twitched near the trigger. You shoot me, and that signal I sent, the one on the Alliance channel, it goes live to every civilian network in the quadrant, including the ones that answer to Terran Congress. You think they'll be okay with footage of soldiers gunning down defenseless aliens again? Her face turned to stone. You bluff? Do I? He tapped his chest. Check my life monitor. It's rigged. Death triggers the upload. You'll silence me, sure, but you'll start a war of a different kind, one you won't win. Leon didn't move. Her breath fogged the air between them. Silence stretched tight as a wire. The soldiers behind her shifted uneasily, waiting for her order. Alex stood firm. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, she lowered her weapon slowly. Her eyes flicked to the others. Stand down. The tension collapsed like glass shattering. Alec nearly fell forward, but he held his ground. Leon's voice was dry. You said a mother and child? He nodded. Gone. Into the tunnels. If you try to chase them, you won't find them. And if you do, they won't fight, but I will. She stared at him for a long, long time. And then she stepped back. You're responsible for this now, she said. Whatever happens next, it's on you. Alec nodded, eyes fierce. It already was. The wind howled once more, but in the space between the humans, something shifted. Not peace. Not yet. But possibility. And far below, hidden in a web of frozen tunnels, two figures waited in silence for a future shaped not by orders, but by one man's refusal to be a machine. Asterisk, asterisk. The storm had finally passed. Above Careth 9, the sky cleared to reveal a black, star-punched velvet dome so sharp and vast it made Alec feel like a breath in the lungs of something ancient. The cold was still brutal, but quieter now, like a beast that had tired itself. Into slumber. Smoke curled faintly from the drop pod's engines, now cooling on the snowy ridge. The soldiers had returned to their vessel, silent and stiff, unwilling to speak of what had nearly happened. Captain Leon hadn't said another word to him. She didn't need to. Her silence was a line drawn in ice. He had made his choice. So had she. Alec remained at the cave's entrance long after the others left, leaning heavily against the wall, body failing but soul alight. The message had gone out. The truth had left his hands. Now the waiting began. He didn't expect her to come back. It would have been smarter for her to stay hidden, to vanish with her child into the glacier's winding veins. But something inside him still hoped without reason, without logic. Just that stubborn ember humanity never seemed to extinguish, the need for closure, for connection. For one last moment, he lit the last flare, not for rescue, but like a candle left burning in a window. A signal not of location, but of longing. Time passed. He closed his eyes. His body sagged from blood loss and cold, but he stayed conscious, willing himself not to fade yet. And just when his breath began to slow, when the shadows in his vision grew long and full of finality, he heard it, the crunch of careful footsteps in snow. He opened his eyes and saw her standing there, framed by pale light. The mother, a lone dot, she approached slowly, her movements cautious but not fearful. She looked different now, less tense, less cold. She stood taller, stronger. Something had changed in her. Not physically, but in the way she carried herself, like someone no longer just surviving, but living. He tried to stand, failed. She reached out and helped him to his feet, their hands gripping with the memory of what had passed between them. "You came back," he whispered. She tilted her head. "To say goodbye." He nodded slowly, eyes stinging from more than the cold. "Is he safe?" She placed her hand over her chest. "He sleeps warm." The words hit him like light. Warm. They were warm. He reached into his jacket and pulled out the holopod one last time, showing her the image of Earth again. He tapped the child's face in the image, then tapped his chest. "My niece," he said. "She'd like yours. I think they'd laugh." She steadied the photo, then looked up at the stars overhead, her expression unreadable. After a long silence, she said, "Will your people come again?" He hesitated, then answered honestly, "Yes, some will come to help, others not yet. But now they'll know who they're coming to meet." She seemed to accept that, not as hope, but as truth. Her kind didn't build dreams on fantasies. They built them on what survived. She stepped back then, her gaze fixed on his. "You changed something," she said. "For me." For him, he didn't respond right away. Emotion gripped his throat like a fist. Finally, he whispered, "So did you. You reminded me who we're supposed to be." And then, without warning, she leaned forward and placed her forehead to his once more. A gesture they now shared like a handshake between two worlds that had nearly destroyed each other, and instead had chosen to see Dot when she pulled away. There were no more words. She turned and disappeared into the ice, her steps vanishing like breath in the air. He didn't follow. He couldn't. Some distances must remain sacred. Later, when the Alliance medevac arrived, brought by his broadcast, not by military order, they found him half-frozen, cradling an inactive flare, eyes closed but smiling faintly. The footage he sent had gone viral across civilian channels, triggering policy reviews, council debates, and protests back home. It had also inspired new teams, scientists, diplomats, medics sent not with guns, but with hands open, and though they searched the glacial tunnels for weeks, they never found the Varellan mother or her child. But across multiple sectors, stories began to surface of nomads being guided away from danger, of lone explorers rescued from collapse, of strange songs heard in the wind just before a storm. A myth grew from that cave, of the human who saved an alien child, of the alien who spared a human's life. They were no longer enemies, no longer specimens. They were a beginning, and in the farthest corners of space, where war once bloomed like frost, something warmer now grew in its place.